Luxury. Today, we've got part one of a very special two-part episode where we talk to a champion of the melting pot of New York art and culture, the very first host of Yo MTV Raps.
That's right, Diallo. In this first part, we'll be talking about the downtown New York scene and the origins of hip-hop, disco, and new wave. And in part two, we will break down Blondie's Rapture, a song our guest was immortalized in.
And sort of encapsulates that. So welcome to part one of our very special conversation with the one and only Fab Five Freddy. I'm actor, writer, director, and sometimes DJ Diallo Riddle.
I'm producer, DJ, songwriter, and musicologist Luxury, aka the guy who whispers, interpolation.
And this is One Song.
The show where we break down the stems and stories behind iconic songs across genres and tell you why they deserve one more listen.
You will hear these songs like you've never heard them before, and you can watch One Song on YouTube and Spotify. While you're there, please like and subscribe.
If you're looking for even more music facts, more conversations, and more us, these two guys, we've got a Patreon now. Go to patreon.com/Diallo Luxury. That's patreon.com, DILLOLUXXURY. In other words, our names.
Do all that spelling. As we mentioned, we have a very special guest with us here today, a pioneer in graffiti who brought that art form and many others to the mainstream, the co-producer and soundtrack co-creator and star of seminal hip-hop film Wild Style, the first host of Yo MTV Raps, and now author with his memoir, Everybody's Fly. It's out now. You have to buy, you have to read it. Oh my gosh. Please welcome Fab Five Freddy in the building.
Hey. Thank you for having me. Honored to be here. Big fan.
We are so happy to have you here. Your book, by the way, which we've been reading, it does such an amazing job of giving everyone who wasn't in New York in the late 70s, early 80s, just, it paints such a vivid picture. You talk about the confluence of hip hop, disco, punk, graffiti, art books. My father was a painter. I grew up with all the art books in my house. You bringing up some of them, I was just, I haven't thought about that name in so long.
Wow.
And importantly, because we're both DJs, you talk a lot about the DJs in New York at this time.
It all starts with the DJs.
Oh, it all starts.
Yes.
Let's give us a tour of the downtown scene in 1980.
Well, I guess even a little before the downtown scene, I'll just give you a taste of, as a younger kid coming up before I hit the scene, what really was the most exciting thing were the mobile disco DJs. And these were guys, some of the names I talk about that were wildly popular was the original Grandmaster Flowers. It was Pete DJ Jones, Maboya, Plummer. Out in Queens, you had the Disco Twins, you had Infinity Machine. These guys have massive sound systems. And just the idea of keeping the music going continually as opposed to—
Without the fade out.
No, well, as opposed to in most people's homes, you had a spindle, you'd put 5 or 6 45s, the arm would swing back, the record would drop down, the arm would go play the record. That's how records were played. If you had a party, that was the mode. The idea of continually keeping the music going, just mixing from one record to the other was a huge innovation, and that is what the mobile disco DJs did. They weren't cutting, scratching, or mixing, but they made being a DJ super cool, super sexy, and these guys would pack. Now, as a young kid, I didn't have any real paper to go to the clubs they spun at. They'd come out in the summer, play at block parties and park jams.
Right.
And it'd be 300, 400, 500, 600 kids or more in these parks until 2, 3 in the morning. This is the classic story. These were the guys that figured out how to bust open the base of the street light, know which wire to connect to, because the wrong wire, you get fried to a crisp. Plug into the city's power supply and rock until the early morning.
I gotta bring this up because your book is so good. It's called Everybody's Fly, Fab Five Freddy's book. So many key details that I thought I knew everything about this period. I did not know everything. The idea that these guys would steal the speakers out of subway trains, and then try and play music through that.
That's what's so desperate to be DJs, man. How do I get a system together?
That sound quality was absolute garbage.
Horrible. And like I said,
But
like
you were saying Flowers and some of the other ones had like these big speakers, right? Like they'd
have big bass bottoms.
Yeah.
This is where you first saw brands like Sherwin Vega.
Yeah.
Parties that these guys spun at would be promoted with how many watts a different DJ system had. Like 3,000 watts. That was an attraction. You know, like, oh shit,
That's
this system
hilarious.
is louder than the next guy.
They're like, you're not going to be listening to the 1 2 3 train speakers at this party, not us.
But what we had heard was because the Bronx was the poorest borough, and kids everywhere wanted to do this. They were like, let's put a system together some way, somehow. Most people in their homes, this is before stereo became a ubiquitous thing.
Right.
People had hi-fi systems.
Yeah.
Oftentimes it was a TV, like a FM radio, and one big speaker. And
maybe a turntable on the top of it.
Turntable on the top, radio on the top, big TV, big massive piece of furniture. And guys would dismantle those to try to get a speaker to cobble together some type of system. But they weren't stereo yet. Stereo became popular later. WBLS, I know in the black community, real popular radio station. Right. The way they did their station ID, oftentimes it would go WBLS, which would move from the left speaker to the left. That was like, oh my God. That was sense around 3D, AI, super duper high tech.
WBLS in New York. WBLS.5, 107.5 in stereo.
And that made people, like, when you talk about, yo, I was at so-and-so's house and the shit went from this speaker to that speaker. Cast, man, I got to get me a stereo. Because what your moms typically had or your parents had was a hi-fi, short for high fidelity.
I know everything was hi-fi in the mid to late 70s. I want to take a second to talk about Flowers, because in your book you say that like he would open up sets. I'm always interested in like, what were DJs playing then? What are some of the forgotten songs? And I remember you mentioned like one of the big closers, I think, was "Love Is the Message" by MFSB.
Love Is the Message was referred to as the anthem. And the mobile DJs, that was a huge song. That was just, oh my God, that was an epic record. And it was really interesting. It was coming out of Philly.
It was out of Philly. It wasn't a New York record.
No, it wasn't a New York record. New York had
Huff.
some, Gamblin' Huff, that Philly soul sound.
SOP.
Had some orchestration. It was like an orchestra. It's like real instruments.
There are like 20 musicians on that track.
Man, listen, this record was incredible.
An orchestra.
And the actual original record was built up once again to this crescendo, a break, if you will, which was one of the most incredible breakdowns. And then that record was, once again, it was a staple across all these mobile DJs. But then on the beginning of rapping side, people wanted to go crazy on that breakdown part.
Yeah.
So cats wanted to hop on that mic. And that eventually, as people learned how to remix records or the idea of capturing the most exciting part of a record, then versions would come out, just an elongated break of that Love Is the Message breakdown, which was so epic, so incredible.
And Manzel's Space Funk is another one with like one of those epic breaks right at the beginning.
Yes.
Those are really fun. I have a question. I didn't know I was going to ask this question.
Okay.
I got to ask this question. Why did guys really seek out the break beats to rap over? Like, did they just not want to sing over? Did they not want to rap over music? Or was it because like the breakbeat was like the hypest part of the song?
Hypest part of the song, the most fun part of the song. If you knew the record, you're at one of these jams, you were waiting for that part. That was the climax. That was the big peak of it all. And, the whole story, which when we take it into the beginnings of rap that grows into hip hop, and then you have the genius Grandmaster Flash is like, I want to be able to continue the energy. He saw there was a decided elevation of the energy when that breakbeat came in, but it was always really brief. And Herc, when Flash goes, when we go up to the Bronx, was trying to, what they call needle drop, pick that up with his hand and just physically drop it back in the groove. You catch it, you might not catch it. Flash wanted to keep that going continuously and seamlessly, which led him on a research and development mission of every turntable available, Marantz, Gemini, Panasonic, whatever, until he hit Now, it wasn't the Technics 1200. It predated that.
Right.
But it had the
It's
direct.
like the AK-30. What is it called?
Might have been that.
Different signature.
Different signature, but it was a direct drive. So when he held that record and let it go, it was up to speed instantly. And
Which
that
makes
was
a big difference because then you don't have to. I was thinking for whatever reason last night about like how I used to kind of like when you would stop a record and it would be like, yeah, like it's kind of like a
the
cool
build
sound.
up. It took a minute. And
But that's not helpful in a party.
yes, it wasn't helpful. And so Flash was obsessed with, and he figured out this was the turntable that allowed that to happen. So that was a major innovation towards what hip hop would bring to the table. But the mobile DJs just basically mixed and blended all the popular songs of that day that you would hear on the popular black radio station, but to be outside in a really loud system, that was a rarity to hear music with that level of fidelity, especially if your system was dope, so you could feel the bass, and you'd feel it. It was something that we all talked about and was sort of in awe of this massive systems that these mobile DJs brought out into the parks.
At the same time, Richard Long is building a massive system at the Paradise Garage.
Well, Richard Long definitely did the garage. He did many clubs and many systems, but he also helped a lot of these mobile DJs with their portable systems. He developed something which became known as a coffin, kind of creepy, which was the all-in-one setup where the turntables would be in there, the mixer. And then he designed these speakers that were just massive. So a lot of the mobile DJs, like I know guys in Queens like, oh, I got a Richard Long system. And it was like, woo, name was ringing. And then cats tried to emulate and recreate and make their own versions of it. So that was the thing that really drove the fidelity once again.
All these innovations are happening on the mobile DJ level, and then they start to make the move into the clubs like Paradise Garage.
Well,
right?
yeah, but before the Paradise Garage, that was the epic, the cathedral, the Vatican of discos. But there were many that led up to that, to what the Paradise Garage was, and that was Richard Long's prize.
Yeah.
And he continually worked and tweaked. I went to the garage many times. They would add baffles in the ceiling to refract the sound. And
I heard that he could control. I had the pleasure of meeting Mel Sharon from West End Records a million years ago. But he told me that Larry had a dial in the booth where he could actually control the temperature. Like he had control over the heat in the garage. Yeah.
Amazing.
So if he was sneaky with it, I'd always be bringing the tempo and the vibe of the party up.
Yeah.
He'd actually increase the heat so that everybody was just losing their minds.
Yeah.
Oh, he'd increase the heat. He wouldn't make it cool.
He would increase the heat.
Wouldn't cool it off.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's just, and you said that the floor was built on sand. It's just an amazing.
Sand and I heard on springs, and he would, in between, periodically, the garage would close for updating and maintenance, and a lot of it would be things that Richard would be adding to the system to make the sound better. So there was a progression to get to that. The club that was the big inspiration, I didn't get to go to this one. The big inspiration to what the Paradise Garage became was David Mancuso's loft, which I think he might have actually lived in. I think it was off of Broadway, maybe in Houston. You'd go upstairs, and it was like house party in a way people describe the vibe. Great documentary called Maestro that a young Latin kid made early 2000s. Yeah. He wasn't even at the garage, but it's the best kind of film about that era, about many of the people. They had incredible footage that shows the garage. Unfortunately, that was the final weekend, which was I had many friends that were going. I think they partied nonstop from Friday into maybe Monday morning. Never stopped.
These are the legendary clubs that we've both grown up reading about and wishing we had been there for. And the thing that I want you to talk a little bit more about, because I don't think a lot of people know this, the history of DJing in this era and in this place was the eclectic music that's being played. Talk a little bit about, to us, what you're going to be hearing at a David Mancuso party, Larry Levan at the Garage. It's not single genre. He's mixing it up, right?
That's true. They were playing a broad variety. They might sprinkle a little African, a little Fela maybe in the mix, and there were different sounds. I can't, to be honest with you, I'm not completely up on all the records they were playing, but they were playing the hottest dance music, and then they were developing this idea of extending the mix and things that were later replicated on the extended disco mix record, the whole long, as disco became the thing. But these are places where the DJs that were the true architects, like the real Michelin chefs in the kitchen. Larry was there. Oh, what's my man, rest in peace, that blew up house music.
Frankie
Knuckles was in the room.
Nicky Ciano is in the mix.
Yes, these cats are there. And in that Maestro doc, he talks to different people and you get a real sense of what they were doing and the vibe and the way they played. And so Larry was there, and I guess what they say learned a lot of the techniques that he would later execute at the garage.
I think Larry, he was doing the continental baths, and that was like a big thing for Larry. And then he took a lot of the lessons of the Go ahead.
No, we were talking about Plato's Retreat a little earlier. The continental baths was the other one.
It was the other one.
This for swing. It's also swingers.
These were primarily like gay.
I was primarily gay thing. What they say, and but. Hey, look, that was a scene. That was a scene, and that was a big aspect of the disco scene as well. Yes. There was like the gay people could be themselves, let it all hang out. They would really get up. They would help shift the party into overdrive with the abandon, with the wildness of that energy. It was
so wild. I mean, like people don't realize. First off, the Paradise Garage was actually a garage.
Correct.
It was just a place for cars.
Yeah.
And you would walk up this long ramp, and as you got closer to the doors, you'd hear the music get louder and louder, build up this anticipation.
Yes.
The other thing that's really interesting about this period, I think, is, there are a lot of DJs in the mix. And one thing that we wanted to ask you was, were there DJs that you thought were great and they just never got the attention?
Oh man! Well, a lot of those mobile DJs that I talked about, particularly the ones that were playing in Brooklyn, the streets, the Pete, DJ Jones, the Maboya, the Plumber, the Grandmaster Flowers. These guys never really made records, so they played music well. They had decent sound systems. Once again, the big innovation was the seamless flow of the music. Yeah. The music never stopped. The only person who did anything close to that was the radio guy, who had the ability to continue the music, which, we could
now,
later...
Was that Frankie Crocker? Who are we talking about here?
Frankie became the most influential black radio jock because most radio, when he was a kid coming up, was heard on AM stations.
Right.
So in New York, the main black station on AM was WWRL 1600. And most people then also, the boombox hadn't come into play. You had a transistor radio. It was kind of mono, you know what I'm saying? And so you might have, FM.
It's weird to think of like Curtis Mayfield, like, oh man, I can almost hear those drums. We're so spoiled now with like perfect sound.
But what happened was Percy Sutton, who was a major player in the New York scene, he was an attorney, he was in politics, and he was in business. He headed up a group that acquired an FM station. They had an AM and an FM station. It was WLIB AM, and then it was WLIB FM, but then they changed the call letters to WBLS, which was short for World's Best Looking Sound. Frankie Crocker had worked his way up. He was on some like white pop station, WMCA in New York, if I'm not mistaken. Then he went to the main black station on AM, WWRL 1600, which would have like commercials for cheap ghetto wine, like Thunderbird and shit like that.
Or, there will be no Thunderbird disparagement.
No
on today's
Thunderbird,
show.
no money down. Pay for the rest of your life, like ghetto furniture. They be offering these.
I did a whole show about it.
I was going to say,
And so when Frankie went to BLS, he wanted to elevate. He was a part of the like George Jefferson moving on up thing. Black folks was like, wait a minute, it's time to get classy, fly, sexy at another level. So he was the program director at WBLS and the main DJ, and he came on from 4 to 8 every day. And man, that became like a huge thing for anybody in the know. You could walk through different parts of the city and hear BLS coming from people's houses and cars. And he would close every show playing this amazing jazz record, King Pleasure's Moody's Mood for Love.
Oh, my parents loved that song.
Money.
My
Everybody
parents
in
love
that
that
era knows every
Yes.
lyric. There I go, there I go, there I go, there I go. And you could check your watch. It'd be right around 8 o'clock. And Frankie be going off. You're like, oh man, he's playing Moody's Mood for Love. But what Frankie did to get it popping in the beginning, because there wasn't big advertisers, the promoters of these mobile disco parties, the Pete DJ Jones, the Plumber, all those cats, they would commandeer restaurants. In that part in the 70s, the city was broke and the people needed help with their businesses. So these promoters went to these restaurants and said, hey, listen, we want to do a party here. We'll split the bar, or you get the bar and we'll get the door. They would take the chairs and tables out and they would promote them on BLS. You would think these were clubs. You were in Brooklyn, you wouldn't know that this is really like a restaurant.
Oh, that's funny.
But it'd be like,
because the restaurant's probably closed by that hour anyway.
Correct. Restaurant would be closed after hours, not much popping on the weekends. So a lot of these DJs played in these places and they would advertise on Frankie Crockett's show. So Frankie, you'd hear these parties like these DJs will be playing at this place, Nell Gwynn's, Nemo's, Superstar Cafeteria, different spots. I wasn't in the mix yet, but I'm hearing all this stuff. I had an aunt. My Aunt Pearl was, hip and fly, and she went to these parties.
It's always that cool aunt who puts you on to so much.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Got a cool relative and whatever. But basically what Frankie would also do, he would be at a lot of these parties, and the hot record that moved the crowd, he would program and start playing these records on BLS. So he wasn't following what the playlist said, what the top 10, top 20, whatever on the black charts was, because he was a program director. He can play, somebody's playing something hot. So as Frankie now is this megaphone, if you will, and he's tapped in to the coolest thing going on, he was playing these records that these DJs found and blowing them up. So he ended up breaking a lot of what became the foundations of disco, like Donna Summer. Oh my goodness.
I gotta imagine.
Chic, of course. He'd be playing these records first because he saw them rock the crowd at this party or that party. And that was huge because if you were tapped in, you'd be like, oh, wow, nobody else is playing this. And then Frankie would interview these guys. So he was a huge force in making disco go from a street, underground kind of gay thing into the Saturday Night Live Studio 54 level when it became like People Magazine feature stories. It was like Frankie, and he doesn't get enough juice, but he set a lot of that off. Unfortunately, when hip hop eases in, as a lot of older blacks from a previous era, they, the aggressive on the corner street energy,
they didn't like it.
He wasn't trying to mess with it. But he was a big inspiration to a lot of it, but he kind of was like,
I think one thing that happens during this period that, again, I didn't know until I sort of read your book was the blackouts in 1977. We're talking about the equipment and how the equipment affected the DJing and how the DJing affected, people's music taste. With the blackout, people stole some turntables and some speakers from
Bronx
those stores.
Went crazy. I mean, everybody went crazy. Looting, not that, it was a horrible thing.
It's horrible.
But boy,
respect private property.
And this is something like Grandmaster Caz and other cats from the Bronx shared this in different hip-hop, history. Like when the blackout in 1977 happened, cats hit the major shopping areas and the electronic stores that had all the stuff. You stand in the window and, man, I'd love to have that. Look at this.
The generation of mobile DJs was born.
A whole generation of mobile DJs got good equipment. Some of these guys was pulling the speakers out of the train station. The shit making announcements. Right. I seen guys trying to jerry-rig shit. I mean, it was such a compelling thing to want to be in that mix. But a lot of cats got their hands on quality stuff. And the Bronx kind of stepped up a few notches considerably. Cats now got it. Because listen, the bottom line is this stuff costs money. And it costs a few $1,000s to put together a real system. There's a really good documentary that I took part in, friends of mine made, including Amin-Ra Lawrence, one of the great producers of a lot of 90s music, a good friend of mine, Hassan Poor. they did a documentary called Founding Fathers, which really is about this era of DJs that predate hip hop. And they focused on a lot of these guys out of Queens. And some of these guys were like, their families were a bit more well-to-do, had a few dollars to give their kid $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 to build a system. That's probably in the 20, 30 grand in this day's money. But
a lot.
4 or 5 grand was a lot. And that's what allowed a lot of these guys to jumpstart to go out and put together these substantial sound systems that sounded great. And so to have that was a desire. But what the Bronx guys would do was they would completely innovate, disrupt, shake up the whole game in a super significant way because they couldn't compete with what these other guys were doing, but they, thanks to Kool Herc and then other people, they came up with something completely different that was game-changing.
All right, well, we're going to take a quick break, but when we get back, we'll continue our conversation with Fab Five Freddy and ask him, is he the reason this music is called hip-hop? We'll be right back. All right, welcome back to One Song. We're here with our guest, Fab Five Freddy.
You're so deeply enmeshed in the early hip hop scene. What is it that people get wrong about it when people mythologize that era?
Yeah.
What are people focused on that's the wrong
question.
thing, or what are they
One
missing?
of the things that I think is connecting to what I'm explaining now is the whole, and this, I think primarily because hip hop became so big, so pervasive, so massive globally, that this idea that because Kool Herc was of Jamaican ancestry, born in Jamaica and came up, they figured, oh, he must have brought this whole dance hall thing up, and that's what the big inspiration for hip hop was. That wasn't the case. Because when Kool Herc comes up, he's like 12 or so years old. He's not trying to emulate what King Tubby and the big producers in Jamaica are doing. I spent a lot of time in Jamaica. I directed most of Shabba Ranks' videos, and I loved the Jamaican scene and sound. I talk about it in my book when it first popped off, when the U-Roy, I-Roy, Big Youth, I was into all that stuff. But basically, what I feel was happening, which was even more interesting, is the Jamaican dancehall DJ and the mobile disco DJ later were emulating what the record DJ, which is the actual original DJ, the disc jockey, was doing. He was the guy on the black side that can talk some slick jive patter, sounded cool, had all the hot records. He controlled music and playing music, and that's what the DJ actually wanted to do. So when you check the early Jamaican sound system, if you really dig in deep, you'll know that the Jamaican DJ, when the weather was right, was able to pick up the black radio station coming out of New Orleans and coming out of Florida, coming out of Miami. All the black DJs had late night shows, but when the weather was right, you could tune in and hear, and that inspired what the early...
That makes so much sense because the early Jamaican DJs, rather MCs, were called DJs. Count Machuki in the late 50s, early 60s.
Right.
He was a DJ, and then the DJs were called selectors because they're selecting the music.
Thank you.
Step at this station for identification. I'm going to turn it over to your sound dimension, your music producer. Everybody on the board.
So that all makes so much sense to connect those dots there, that what they share in common was they were both separately influenced by DJs on the radio.
That was the guy that was doing it. And the New York guys, it was the same thing. You now have the power to be like the radio guy, but he's bringing that to your community, and he can keep the music going. It never stopped. That was like, oh my God, one record to another record, especially if you at a party. Come on, the main reason for these parties is guys want to get with chicks, right? So boom, if the music is flowing, you could dance with a girl for 3-4 records if the DJ kept it moving right. But on the other old style with the 4 or 5 45s on the spindle, the record was a 10 or 20 second stoppage.
You got 3 minutes to close the deal. You got 3 minutes, and then you got a 20-second awkward pause.
And the other thing that's long gone, I don't know if you guys realize this, is the every party back in the days, house party, whatever you were, there was a section where the DJs would play slow jams.
That still existed when I was coming up in the 90s. Like when I was in college in the 90s, I always ended the night with like 1 or 2 slow jams.
See, in the night. But there were intermittent parts through the party where there'd be a slow jam section, and you'd want to hopefully have a nice chick that you maybe dance with on a dance record.
Yeah.
And then if the slow joints come in, you would hope honey would stay there with you, and then you got to hold her tight and get your rub up on. That was epic. That was huge. Like, and then if the DJ can play 3 or 4 slow jams, I mean, come on, you practically making a baby. Yo, this is
I had my first kiss to a Mary J. slow jam. You know, so there you go. There's my little bit of hot gas. I'm glad you bring up Kool Herc because there's been some debate online about the specific date of birth of hip hop with, you know, there are camps that have said, you know, and I think pretty much everybody embraced the 1973 thing because we just did the 50th year a couple of years back. But there are a lot of people who will say, hey, look, 1975, way more accurate. I think even in your book, you're like, you know, the guys throwing the cardboard down and like just dancing on the spot. Like that's more like 75 than it's 73. And do we... What is your opinion? Do you think we should clock it from 73, 75, or somewhere else?
Listen, what Herc did at that party, him and his sister put together at 1520 Sedgwick Avenue in the boogie down Bronx was incredible. It was pivotal. It was a spark, if you will, that set off a series of major moves that would happen, including Flash going, wow, I hear what he's trying to do.
He's doing because Kirk is doing the break beats, but they're a little wonky. As you said, he's needle dropping.
He's needle dropping.
Right.
He's playing some
stuff. He doesn't have a system.
He doesn't have a system to actually keep the beat going continuously. But what he's doing, his parties is dope, and he lays the foundation for the whole
He's got
thing.
the 2 records and the 2 turntables, so he's got step 1.
Once again, so he has that going on. But the key thing, and I get into this in my book, it wasn't hip hop technically yet. It was the beginnings of that and the beginnings of the form of manipulating the records. Flash will tell you when he was doing his thing, when he figured it out and he was bringing his set out into the parks, he said people wasn't dancing. They would just stand there staring because they were so amazed and like, how are you doing this? This is amazing. I haven't heard this anywhere. So Flash was like, yo, people just staring at me. He wanted to make people move. So Flash was like, man, if I can get somebody to get on the mic and keep them talking and talk to the crowd to get them off of just staring at me and people could get them move, you know, throw your hands in the air, waving like you just don't care, all of that stuff, which is the basic beginnings of rapping.
Yeah.
That was when the first rapper stepped up and, oh my God, I'm not sure if it was Kid Creole or Keith Cowboy, but one of these guys stepped up and talked about the DJ, because most of the early rappers, their job was to talk about how incredible the DJ was, because he was the one that brought everything out into the park. He was the focus of attention.
Is that the same Kid Creole with the coconuts?
No,
that's a different Kid Creole. Okay,
which is actually Melly Mel's brother, Kid Creole with the Furious Five. It's interesting news, right? It was a Kid Creole.
I always get those two. There's a couple. It's the same way. There's like multiple Dr. Dre's. There's like a couple of names that you can recycle.
You mentioned it a couple of times already in our conversation. It sounds like the really important thing was this continuation. The second things began to be continuous in terms of the music not stopping.
Correct.
That was the like hypnotic moment
that
where
was a
things
big
shift
innovation.
into overdrive.
The music's not stopping. You're blending. It was really like blending one record into another, so the music never stopped. That was like, wow.
It's almost like you could say hip hop don't stop.
That's exactly right.
All right, stop the episode right there.
Okay, we're done.
Hip hop and you don't stop. But what actually happens, and I elaborated on it in the book, in the ideas that I had, which became hip hop's first film, Wild Style.
Yes.
The idea, once again, was to showcase, myself, an aspiring painter. Nobody was looking at any of these cultures with any kind of love, or it was just, we were the scourge, graffiti was, whatever. I wanted
so many things. Everything seems illegal. It's like, why are you talking tough over the song instead of trying to sing and make it beautiful? Why are you spray painting on walls? Like, it's like, why are you creating noise in these parks after dark? You know?
Correct. It was no real love there.
Yeah.
But in trying to take control of the narrative and shape a context for who we were, myself as a painter, to show that a lot of it was vandalism and just crazy, wild, crazy teenage energy. There were artists and art that was emerging. If you looked at it and said, well, it's illegal. You probably shouldn't have spray painted all over the windows and everything on the train. But goddamn, that's a pretty good Bugs Bunny. The letters look wild, and you got the 3D drop shadow right. It's like, hey, And so, I
loved it when you said you were going to make the train look like a loaf of Wonder Bread. You're like, that's a moving statue.
That was exactly what Lee and I. So the first idea was I was, had gotten found out about
Lee Quinones.
Yeah, Lee Quinones,
very famous graffiti artist.
Very famous graffiti artist that I linked up with and had these ideas that we should be able to. I figured, let's find a way to elevate out of just doing this on the subways and get this work into a space where it can be appreciated and looked at as artists as opposed to teenage delinquents.
Yes.
And Lee got it. And I had gotten really into the work of Andy Warhol, the other pop artists, Lichtenstein, and I'm saying, wait, these guys are looking at similar stuff to what we're looking at, comic books and advertising and soapbox, big, bold, bright lettering. And Warhol, of course, was just such an inspiration. And I was like, man, I think if we could paint a train covered in Campbell's soup cans as a homage to him, it would also send a message that some of us down here know something about art history.
We know what's happening on the other end of this island.
Exactly. And so we did that train. Lee assisted. We went and did a Campbell's soup can. I did 2 versions of it. But what we planned to do, we were going to do a Wonder Bread and Tasty, which were 2 loaves of bread, but it was going to be Wonder Fred and Taste Lee.
Taste Lee.
And we are going to make them look like the loaves of bread. It was going to be very simple. But
I just want to call attention to this because what's incredible and important is that your background as an artist and one who studied, as you mentioned, Warhol, you were able to recognize and identify that by framing what was going on in an artistic way with maybe the language of, and maybe you knew the art world. You understood.
I was learning. I was figuring it out.
You were figuring it out.
Yeah.
You understood that if you could sort of package what was going on, maybe use the right terminology to the right people in the right way.
Correct.
You could reframe the narrative, and you did.
I did, exactly. That was exactly my idea. And but where was I going to find an audience I could share these ideas with? That was the new wave punk folks. And looking at what that was doing when it was page 2 hard news New York Times stories about the Sex Pistols scaring the hell out of the establishment, I was like, wow, this is wild. These people sound wild, crazy, super disruptive. How could I connect with some people in that space and share these ideas? I would eventually get to do that initially through Glenn O'Brien.
Glenn O'Brien has this article, has a column.
He has a column.
Interview magazine.
An interview called Glenn O'Brien's Beat. Actually, once again, this grows out of me learning more about Andy Warhol. He started a magazine, he made films, all this multimedia stuff Andy was doing, and having fun. In the heart of the 60s, a lot of the coolest stuff was emanating out of Andy's crew, the Factory, the Superstars. And it was like, man, these guys, it's not the like staid, kind of corny academic kind of artists. These guys are partying, they're having a good time, drugs and shit. It was like, it was going down.
Because we're parents, I just want to point out, you do not really partake in all the drugs.
No, I did not. No. But
that's why you're here talking to us today.
Yeah, but I mean, in terms of what we know about in the 60s, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, this was happening.
Right.
And a lot of the creative energy, a lot of it was coming out of Andy's team, the kind of light shows, and they would do these kind of wild, psychedelic.
And you had the Velvet Underground was the house band.
Velvet Underground, he was producing and supporting the Velvet Underground, which featured Nico and Lou Reed, and people you hear about this cool Jimi Hendrix. They're all passing through this mix.
This is the world I wish I lived in. I was born too late.
Come on, it just seemed really good. So in reading about all that stuff, it just seemed really cool. So basically, Glenn O'Brien was in that mix and was the original editor of Interview magazine when it really focused on underground filmmakers and really extreme stuff. it shifted a bit after Andy got shot, and he kind of backed off of a lot of it was literally an open door policy at the factory.
Right.
Anybody could wander in there, and a woman wandered in there. It's like, Andy Warhol is controlling my wife, and like shot him. And I think it was interestingly on the same day earlier than RFK was shot.
Okay.
And that took, later that day, that took Andy off the front pages.
Sorry, you literally got 15 minutes.
Haha.
Sorry, okay, that's gonna keep going. Anyway.
So basically, Glenn had this column, deep connection with Andy and that whole scene, but he was writing about music, and it was fascinating. He'd write about dance music, chic, disco, new wave, Brian Eno, the Talking
He had
Heads.
a public access TV show too, right? TV Party?
Yeah, so what happens was when I'm doing a college radio show, me and this kid had a show about reggae. It was called The People's Beat. I'm reading this guy's column, and he talks so effectively about reggae, and I'm learning, and I'm going to buy some of these records, and I'm like, wow, Dillinger, CB200. I'm like, oh, so I was, man, let me see if I can call this cat. Maybe he'd come out and be a guest on my college radio show, which he did. So he comes, we interview him, and then in walking him back to the train, him heading back to Manhattan, this is Medgar Evers College in Brooklyn, the community college, I'm pitching these ideas, graffiti as art. There's this new kind of music where people are rapping over the tracks in the Bronx, and I kind of see this stuff as all linked together. And he was digging it. He says, in 3 months, I'm going to be doing this public access show on cable. Cable was still new. Brooklyn wasn't wired yet. I'm like, public access, but cable TV? Yeah, I'm going to have this TV show. I'd like you to come on and talk about these things. I was like, wow, really? And basically 3 months later, he calls me to be a guest on the show. I also end up being a cameraman. So I'm like, become a regular participant in a public access TV show. This is where you'd pay about $30-$40 if you got a time slot. You would get a half hour or an hour to do.
You could curse, you could do nudity, which was unheard of back in those days.
Unheard of. That was even about cable.
Robin Bird.
Robin Bird, look at you.
I used to live in New York. Yeah, I know.
I should take this opportunity. My brother Anthony Riddle was the head of Manhattan MNN for a long time.
Yes.
That's my brother.
Yeah, okay.
And he ran Brick for a long time. And so public access TV is like something that runs deep in
It's a New York institution.
Yes.
But yes, exactly. These are the lawless days of Manhattan public access.
Completely. And so when I show up 3 months later to be a part of this TV show, the cream of the downtown new wave scene, the intelligentsia, are there. And they're the audience and the guests on the show. So this is how I connect. His co-host of Glenn O'Brien's TV Party is Chris Stein from Blondie.
Yep.
And so I get to meet these people, and as I become friends, I share these ideas I'm developing, and they're loving it. Oh man, I've seen that stuff on the train. So a lot of that stuff's really great. Oh wow. And I'm like, whoa, so we're trying to figure out how to do this and do that. And Glenn, they became like mentors, advisors, and really good friends. And that really shifts these things into high gear. This idea I have to make a film, an underground independent film about all this, to show all these elements that I think are really interesting. So to jump forward a little bit, if I can, as we put pieces together, me and Charlie Ahern is a guy I meet at a very significant art show called the Times Square Show, the most radical show. It's on the Village Voice, the first radical art show of the 80s. It's 1980. I'm like, this feels like the Armory show of 1913, which introduced Marcel Duchamp and the idea of really extreme modern art.
Dada.
Dada and all that stuff pops off for the first time. I'm like, man, this art show and it was held in a former massage parlor, which essentially was a whorehouse in Times Square at the time. And I'm like, man, I want to be a part of this. And so anyway, I eventually meet this guy. He was like a new wave curator. His name is Diego Cortez. And he's, tapping into what we're doing. And he's like, yo, I know the guy that's putting it together. Let's go to one of the first events. At this event, I meet Charlie Ahern, and I pitch him this idea. Charlie's done an underground film about Kung Fu shot in Super 8. Wow. It's a real urban Kung Fu film called The Deadly Art of Survival with a black Kung Fu teacher, fighting another Kung Fu thing.
don't think I know this film, and I didn't
Super
know it was gonna
ultra low budget.
Okay.
This never really got major distribution. But anyway, I see this guy Charlie. I've seen the poster for the Deadly Art in the Lower East Side. I know it's one of those underground independent films. I say, hey man, I got this idea. He goes, man, I love it. And he's heard of Lee's work because where he made this film is in the housing project where Lee lives, the Smith houses at the base of the Brooklyn Bridge. Anyway, Charlie and I team up and we begin to start working on what becomes Wild Style. So what happens is we immerse ourselves in the scene. We go to all the hip hop clubs in the Bronx, T Connection, Ecstasy Garage, the Dixie, Celebrity Club, Disco Fever. So we meet the key players and we was like, these guys are great. This group's great. The Funky Four is great because they have this female, Sha Rock. Busy Bee is a riot, a great star personality. So we are shaping this film. We can't raise any money from all the independent financing sources, but we actually, Charlie connects with the people from German TV, the people from the Fourth Channel in England, and they believe this idea Channel 4 in England, and they give us enough money to get the thing moving. So anyway, we're making the film, we're in production. There's no name for this whole thing. We refer to it as rap because that's the main thing, but there's DJs and there's...
We don't have the expression hip hop yet. Doesn't exist.
The expression exists among rappers as a way to take a breather, if you will. I'm sure there's probably
hip-hop, you don't stop.
a more proper music term for when you just take a breath in between your rhyme. You could say this to the crowd, to the hip, the hop, the hip, the hop, the hop, it
It's kind of placeholder, like kind of
a placeholder.
The name
kind
of the genre could be Yes Y'all if somebody else had made the decision. You know,
well, we were thinking, I'm like, what are we gonna call this shit? And then I said, Charlie, I said, every other rapper says this as like a refrain, if you will, which might be the term for this moment when you're literally thinking about what your next rhyme is. So after you spit a nice rhyme, 12, 8, 16 bars or whatever, you back to the hip, the hop, or throw your hands in the air. There's a bunch of little things in between your raps. I said, Charlie, I think we should just call it hip hop. Because in looking at the new wave and the punk scene, which I had been looking at closely as a movement, we knew what that was called and what it was, and the differentiation between punk rock and new wave, and then no wave and post-punk and all that stuff. You kind of knew what those genres.
But once again, you had the insight that somebody named something. You can frame it. So you framed it.
Because I'm reading these articles in the NME. I'm reading all the sounds and the journalism.
It's usually coming off of a journalist deciding to call it something, and then other people pick up on it.
That's right. Typically it is. And typically it's not. And that's the thing that also inspired my thinking is Max Roach was my godfather, the great bebop jazz drummer.
Insane. Never
liked the term jazz. His bio that he never got to release, although he worked on it with Amiri Baraka, the former Leroy Jones, he would always tell me, I'm going to call my memoir, Jazz is a Four-Letter Word. The origins of the term jazz apparently comes from New Orleans, and it was a slang expression for sex in the whorehouses. I think jazz me was, in some jazz book I read, and that evolved.
A relationship to another word too.
Okay, and
that so that's totally true. I've always heard that.
Well, where did he prefer?
I don't know what he preferred as an alternative, but being like an intelligent black man and not being able to have the control of the genre in the ways that they wanted to was frustrating. And I picked up on that. But I always, in saying, look, these guys are already saying hip hop, it felt more encompassing, and we could fit all these other components of the culture up under that umbrella. I did run it by Bambaataa. He totally said yes, without question. And then in reference to what you were texting me about, which I think the other brother that wrote that book mentioned, in terms of these years, 73, 75, the first time hip hop is used in print, I reached out to Michael Holman, who I turned on to the game and the culture, and Michael got locked in. He was managing the New York City Breakers. The East Village Eye does a whole issue with several different articles the idea was the promotion of Wild Style. We were gearing up for our release, and this is our key downtown paper. So I shared with Michael Holman, we're going to be calling it hip hop. And when Michael did his piece, I think in an interview with Bambaataa, he referred to it as such. It ends up being the first time it's referenced. And then as we imprint and as we continue on to promote the film, this is how we reference what all of this is. Wow. And so essentially that sticks. And I feel like I like to look at it as a fact, like, no, I didn't name it, but it was a word that was there that I just pushed into help.
But to be clear, you kind of named hip hop is kind of what we're hearing here.
Well,
Let's be clear.
Once again, I didn't want to.
You didn't say that I did.
Yeah. But essentially, it was there, and I just helped nudge it into place. It needed to be called something, and we had a film coming out. What are we going to call all of it? Rapping? It's rapping along with this dance and this art. It's like, huh? So it felt a lot better. It came, I feel, from the community who had popularized use of that term. It was there being used, so it was an effortless move. And none of the many hip-hop flyers, which are in numerous collections, nothing references it as hip-hop until after that period of time.
But I was going to ask, are what we now refer to as the pillars of hip-hop, was that a thing at the time that people were starting to like articulate?
Well,
There's
Wild
breakdancing,
Style, once again,
graffiti.
this is what we frame up in Wild Style. These were the elements that I felt this is what I wanted to showcase in the movie, to show that we were not the delinquents. What annoyed the hell out of me in this process was whenever you saw a young black or brown kid with swagger, hat to the side or whatever, it was always connected to something negative.
Right.
And I was like, crime. And I'm like, damn, this is wild. Like, we all are not that just because you put on, the right track suit, you got the right fit, cool sneakers, Pumas on or whatever. And I didn't like that. And another motivation for me was to frame this up and to show us as creatives, which we were. And then the other concept of Wild Style was to use the actual players in the various forms to play themselves. Mm-hmm. I'm one of the few people actually acting. A lot of people still think I'm from the Bronx, but I play this character. We actually wanted Phase 2, who literally was a legendary New York graffiti writer, who then progressed to designing flyers, some of the early hip-hop flyers for Ecstasy Garage and different gigs. We couldn't get him to play the role. He just wanted to keep it on the ground. So Charlie Ahern talks me into looking at me weird one night. I'm like, Charlie, why are you looking at me like that? Fred, you could be this character. And I'm like...
I heard that Lee Quiones made them get the scar across the nose because he was like, yeah, I don't want the police to recognize me. Then I think it was Charlie who was like, dude, your face is going to be 40 feet tall on the screen. They're going to recognize you.
Lee was so reluctant. It was a religious experience, the idea of painting for him. Even though we get him to play the movie, we get him to play the role, we'd auditioned different people, like Giancarlo Esposito. We saw in a off-Broadway Negro ensemble play, and we were like, this guy's great. Yeah. But he was SAG, and the film wasn't. We were super dumb, ultra low budget. Like, how are we going to figure that one out? But what Charlie cleverly came up with, Charlie Ahern, was he told Lee, well, listen, we'd cast Lady Pink, and they were an actual item at the time. Mm-hmm. Said, well, yeah, Lee, we're going to definitely have an actor play this role. And of course, there will be a makeout scene.
And plays to the man's jealousy.
Me was like, whoa, okay, I'm going to play that part. But Lee was like, would not allow us to film him painting a train. So we got Blondie to double for Lee. So when you actually see somebody walk up to do the painting from the back, it's Blondie, rest in peace, who was a master of it all. So we went through all these kind of wild hoops we had to jump through and climb under and to get the film made. And it's remarkable that we did. And first hip-hop film.
We love that movie. We've talked about it on at least 4, maybe 5 episodes now of this show.
It's one of my favorite movies. I remember when they finally got its proper DVD release. It was one of the first things that I purchased. There's a story, I think, about the stick-up kids. Those are actual stick-up kids, right?
Well, I'm not sure if they were stick-up kids, but when we were shooting at the Dixie Club, all the interior performances, these guys were just neighborhood guys that were hanging out. They would be watching us make this film. Yeah. So Charlie had this rinky-dink, it looked like the kind of 6-shooter kids would play with. You put caps
It looks
in
fake. Yeah.
Fake as it looked very fake. And so, but
It's
that's
like
what
cable TV. You can curse here.
fake as fuck. Basically. So these dudes, so we're actually doing a run through of the scene, which I'm in. I came out and kind of saved the day. We wanted to have a moment that let people know this shit is just not some howdy doody.
Yeah.
This shit is still edgy up here. We in a boogie down Bronx and it's edgy as fuck. So these dudes watched us do a run through with the gun. They said, yo, man, what's that? Yo, that's some bullshit. Let me show you something. The dude goes to his car and goes up under the thing and takes out this sawed off, which was a thing back in the day.
Which is illegal then.
Yes, the sawed off shotgun.
Yeah.
And he says, yo, I was like, yo, that's crazy. Yes. And so these...
And of course your armorer on set came over and inspected it and made sure it had never been...
We had none of that. I used to look at films of... I remember when we were preparing for Wild Style, I looked at books about independent filmmaking, underground filmmaking at that time. And one of the books said, because we had no permits or nothing, they was like, if you guys wear NYU sweatshirts or whatever, you could say you're like students. So I was like, Charlie, we got to get sweatshirts to the thing. We were in the Bronx. Yo, they would drive by us. They didn't even look twice. We're shooting, you know, our little crazy crew. They never paid any attention to us. But basically, those dudes, Pookie and another guy was his name, played the stick-up kids and improvised their own stick-up lines.
Which is iconic.
A to the K, A to the K, A to the M motherfucking Z.
Which makes almost no sense.
It makes almost no sense. There's kids that have emerged, I've seen in little chats and shit that say, oh, here's what that really meant, blah, blah, blah. But
you're like, nah.
I'm like, dude,
they made that up
know.
on the fly.
But the thing, what was dope about those kids, they was believable, they was real. The way they rolled up, what's up, you know, because stick-up kids were a thing. That was a major thing, a big hustle in the hood. Guys would rob you for your clothes, your jewelry,
Shoes.
your little money, your sneakers, take them up, run it. Like I directed a video for, you know, I grew up close to a lot of that stuff. I directed a Gangstar video called Just to Get a Rep.
Just thinking of a way and went to get the brother. They'll be long gone before the kid recovers. And back around the way, he'll have the chain on his neck, claiming respect just to get a rep.
Just to Get a Rep, a classic. You say, oh, just this old gangster song. Just
But it was about that whole stick-up kid thing and doing it to get a rep. And I was like, oh, man, I know this so well. And it was a mad low-budget video. But I said, yo, I got this, Guru and Primo, and put that together. But anyway, those guys pulled that off, and it was an amazing moment in the film. Yes, A to the K.
They couldn't even get together on A to the what. They one says A to the K, the other says A to the
Z.
A to the motherfucking Z.
And he pulls the shotgun out, and then I walk out. Hey, those people are cool, man. Those my people, baby. Ease up. Oh man, I had no idea. They were your friends. Wild, he improvised the whole shit. We let him go. So that was Wild Style.
And the soundtrack to this.
Yeah,
is insane. I mean, like, you know, obviously we did an episode about Nas's Illmatic and the intro to that album, which incorporated so much of it.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about those breakbeats? I mean, like, was it?
Well, here's what it was. So once again, super low budget film. Sampling hasn't even begun, but in terms of the foundations of hip hop, it's these DJs with these really rare, initially hard to find breakbeat records. This is a foundation of the genre as it develops that Herc helped set off. Records like Apache, Mardi Gras, Bob James Mardi Gras, Impeach the President. I mean, there's a list of these breakbeat records that are the foundation of the hip hop scene. And I'm like, Charlie, come on, this shit is, ain't nobody gonna know. Like, rap is barely emerged. Maybe Rap is D-Light and a few singles are out. I'm like, let's just use what they use in Uptown, baby. Mm-hmm. Charlie was adamant that it's gonna be a problem. And years later, it clearly would have been. So he goes, no, Fred. And I go, that's all right. I'll go in the studio and make these beats and make the music. So I get this cat who's a drummer, white cat, real cool, rest in peace, Lenny Ferraro, but we called him Lenny Ferrari, funny guy, great drummer. He worked on some Atlantic sessions with Aretha and shit like that. He was together. I said, Lenny, man, I need to create these. Okay, so I took Lenny into the studio, played him. The Supreme team radio show on WHBI would have a section called the Supreme Team Breaks. They would play a section of break beats in this show, and I recorded that. That's how you got it. You
had your tapes. Yeah, we were talking about
shit
that.
Ready to record, you know. And so I played Lenny some actual break beats, some different varieties. So we went in the studio and laid down a bunch of breaks. Then I knew this cat out of Philly, David Harper, that played with a bunch of Philly groups on the road, First Choice, this, that, and the other. I said, man, he did the bass. And then I realized, then I learned in the studio, well, you should have the bass and drums recording together. I'm like, shit. We had to fix that and get that. So then we get the foundation. And then Chris Stein comes in with all different kind of pedals and guitar stuff to add different sounds to make these little short 1-minute tracks. I came up with about 12 of them, and that's how we create the foundation of the music that then I pressed up about 100 pieces of vinyl of those songs and distributed them to the different DJs, Grand Wizard Theodore, Charlie Chase and Tony Tone, Flash, they all get, so that they can pick the different songs they want to cut and mix for when the DJs perform. Most of them hear the other ones using Down by Law. That's what we want to use too. That's why a lot of the performances they hear have Down by Law, but we do use some of the other break beats. And then we record that. The first whole time we filmed it all, we screwed up, had to reshoot all the club scenes, the big amphitheater thing again, because we didn't know what the hell we were doing. We had a stereo Nagra. That was the tape deck you'd use at the time. Didn't have it hooked up right. Sound was overmodulated, butchered, trash.
I love it, though. We were talking about that as you were walking into the building today. We were playing it through this speaker in here, which looks like it belongs on a subway train. But we were playing it, and we were actually literally talking. We love the fact that you have so much like mic bleed and like the mic is clipping. Like there's something sort of raw about the whole experience that makes it, ironically, like you were such a fan of punk and like that sort of like raw sound. Like it just sounds raw when you listen to like the Fantastic Freaks at the amphitheater. You know what I mean? Like I think that's what makes it endearing.
That does, and that's so nice of you to say. So because we had a super low budget, people have asked me, Kenny Dope put out
Masters at Work and dance music, sort of.
Yeah, but he put out a special 45 set of those breakbeats that I did because it became, as we went into the 90s and DJs began digging and also looking for everything ever sampled and more things to sample, people were like, what did they use in Wild Style? They assumed I'd sampled some 60s soul with whoever or whatever, and nobody knew. It was this big thing, and I'd meet guys that were major DJs. But man, what did you use? And I was like, oh shit, I made all these records and boom, boom. So they never came out as just the instrumental records, and Kenny Dope did a whole thing and did a really exhaustive research on the liner notes and the packaging. He had photos of the 1-inch box with all of the writing and all that stuff to give you that sense. Like, and so those came out at that point, and that was really cool. But we put all that together, and it was just pretty cool.
Well, that's amazing. So that was basically the foundational period where you start working with Chris.
Yeah, and Chris Stein comes in and adds all this incredible sound. He was really a big inspiration through it all, and then released the soundtrack on Animal Records, which was his own label under Chrysalis at the time. They were the initial people that released. Chris really believed, and I mean, the Blondie was one of the biggest pop bands in the world, so we were able to use their name a lot. And, Chris, Blondie's helping us, and blah, 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 blah. We got Chris and Debbie from Blondie. Oh, really? Ooh. To help get over hurdles we had, and it was super helpful and supportive of all of that.
All right, that's the end of part 1. Stay tuned for part 2, which will be posted here next week, where we and Fab Five Freddy will break down Blondie's Rapture, a song that forever immortalized his name. And trust me, even if you've heard this song a million times, you've never heard it broken down like this. Thanks for listening. As always, you can find us on Instagram and TikTok. You can find me on Instagram at Diallo, Diallo, and on TikTok at Diallo Riddle.
You can find me on Instagram at LUXXURY and on TikTok at LuxuryXX.
And you can follow our podcast on Instagram and TikTok at One Song Podcast for exclusive content. You can also watch full episodes of One Song on YouTube. Just search for One Song Podcast. We'd love it if you like and subscribe.
Also, be sure to check out the One Song Spotify playlist for all the songs we discuss in these episodes. You can find the link in our episode description.
And if you made it this far, you're officially a part of the One Song Nation. Show us some love, give us 5 stars, leave a review, and send this episode to a fellow music fan. It really helps keep the show thriving.
And by the way, if you're looking for even more music facts, more conversations between Diallo and LUXXURY, and basically more of us, we've got a Patreon now. You can find us at patreon.com/Diallo LUXXURY. That's right, Diallo LUXXURY.
LUXXURY, help me in this thing.
I'm producer, DJ, songwriter, musicologist, and every Friday night from 10 till midnight, KCRW DJ, LUXXURY.
And I'm actor, writer, director, and sometimes DJ Diallo Riddle.
And this is One Song. We'll see you next time.
This episode was produced by Casey Simonson, mixing and engineering by Eric Hicks.